Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. All right. Well, we are back again with another episode of the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I'm Chad Hufford. This is Greg Parrott. And we're going to unpack a wonderful episode, an interview with Scott recently, who just a phenomenal human being, has done some really incredible things and very active in the business and economic climate here in Alaska, but also in ministry and just in the community. I didn't realize until we had that episode, he actually owned the sports complex out there. I knew he built it, but owns it, runs it. And it's just, he's created multiple fixtures in the community outside of the construction industry to just really leave a legacy for his work. And especially coming out of COVID, I just think, so many people got used to not getting together. And that's really been a passion of his, is to create community around some of these things. The club that he has out there for men in particular, the sports complex. Like
it was a Band of Brothers or something like that?
Band of Brothers. It started as a coffee shop.
Right.
But again, it's an excuse to meet, get people together. And we talk about this all the time, Greg, how finance is often done alone.
Right.
And we try to create community around that, not just community within our office and those families, but even helping them find other people in their life, opening up conversations so they don't feel like they're doing this alone. And I think so many people do feel like, they're doing finances alone and they're making mistakes. They can't share that with anybody. But I know guys in general just live life that way.
Sure.
Whether it's in our marriages or in raising kids, in our jobs, in our careers, that we feel like we can't go to anybody, we can't talk to anybody. Right. And that's something that Scott really has, you can just tell it's a big heart issue or big mission of his, is to help people create community, to find each other, to lift each other up. And it was really neat to see how he's been able to do that.
Definitely. What it kind of reminds me of is that book, The 7 Habits of the Highly Effective Person, with that think win-win, right? What Scott did a really good job at over time is, he created these awesome jobs for other people. And yes, he won, but so did everybody else. And then not only that, but not only his employees, but the community at large was huge. Just the way that he talks about generosity, and that he was very humble in the way that he spoke, with speaking about how, hey, I didn't create this. The people that I worked with and were surrounded by created this. And it was interesting and awesome to see a different approach to business, where he really wanted to be just extremely generous, and the chips fell where they may, and he became very profitable at it.
Well, and obviously did excellent work for a long period of time, surround himself with good people, but continued to pour into those people. And there's so many different areas we could go, but just on this idea of, again, community and this team approach. Obviously he had that in his business, and I'm sure that he saw a lot of people throughout his time working in a very volatile, high stress industry, working in contracting, where I was going to say the weather can shift very quickly, metaphorically and literally. Alaska is not an easy place to run that type of business. And I'm sure that he met with so many people, rubbed shoulders with so many people who were stressed out and felt alone. And we know that a lot of those people, at least from a business standpoint, didn't make it. The 80s especially wiped out so many different people, people that had good, solid businesses. And it was just thinking about how he talked about risk, and there's no such thing as no risk
Right.
in life, whether it's in your investing and just getting out of bed in the morning. We all take risks, but it's taking calculated risks. But one of the many things that allowed Scott to be successful is to be able to absorb some of those blows. And too often, I think, Greg, people plan in life for everything to go perfectly. Just think about how people schedule out their day, and they're running late all day long because they pushed snooze on their alarm clock.
Yep.
And it started with that. And they had to take a shorter shower, and they didn't have time to make breakfast. They stopped at McDonald's, and their whole day is now just running a few minutes behind. And you plan for everything to go perfectly, and all it takes is one little hiccup and your whole day is thrown off.
Right.
And you and I know with kids, like nothing ever goes as planned, trying to get people ready and out the door. But that's just in our schedule, like our day-to-day schedule. But in life in general, I think so many people plan for everything to go great. And all it takes is a little disruption. Maybe they get laid off, or they don't have quite as many hours. We know a lot of people in law enforcement, in the oil field, where you spend too much money, you just take more overtime. But what if those are not available? And we just live on such thin margins that even minor hiccups, like a big credit card bill, can be hugely disruptive.
Sure.
Because there is no margin.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think debt is a big piece of that, right? Well, one of my questions for you then is, what was that like for you? You're a business owner. What was that like for Chad Hufford, creating a business with that risk? Did you ever accrue any debt when you were doing it?
We started with no debt, and there was a period where we did. And that was adding insult to injury. Okay. And it wasn't because there's like big purchases and stuff. It was just trying to keep food on the table for the kids. And and that we were able to eliminate that pretty quickly. But Greg, that was one of the things that even allows me to be here today, right now. As you know, I started in 2007. So 2008, 2009, the financial crisis wiped out a lot of businesses, wiped out a lot of small companies, wiped out a lot of financial advisors. And the only reason I was able to survive is we came into that with no debt. Wow. And thankfully paid off everything ahead of that. But those are some pretty big bumps that we were able to absorb. And they were difficult, they were hard, but they were survivable because we had no debt. And for Scott, and I don't know all the details, but I'm sure there were times where debt may have been taken on, but so many folks in the 80s were way far over leveraged, just assuming that they would build this project up and then use some of that money to fund the next one, and leveraging this house or this property to get in the next one. Right. Or, of course, in construction too, you're often past due, or at least there's a long lead time between when you actually do the work, when you get paid. So you're putting money into this and waiting for things to come in, and people often use debt to carry that. But in the 80s, you had situations where you're doing a job for somebody, you're waiting to get paid, that person is going out of business.
Exactly. And
now it's just this domino effect where now the financial troubles in somebody else's life become your financial troubles. Sure. And those times they happen somewhat regularly. We saw again 2008, 2009, where this domino effect, and a lot of it was debt.
Can I ask you, where do you normally see debt turn into this crisis where it's like, does that question make sense? Like, where do the dominoes start to fall when people have debt?
Well, you can live paycheck to paycheck on almost any salary.
Sure.
And one of the things we've talked about before on this podcast is one of the fundamental rules to building a life of financial independence is to live within your means. And Scott did that. He's done that. He still does that. There's a margin between what he produced and what he consumed. And a lot of people don't have that. So when you're living paycheck to paycheck and accumulating debt, as long as everything goes great, you're okay. but then it doesn't take much of a ripple. It's like running in those like barefoot shoes. You feel like every little pebble and things like that.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I didn't even have shoes on, but was going downstairs, lights were off, and I went to go turn on one of the lights, stepped on a Lego, felt like a nail went through my face. Like, talking about something relatively small.
Right.
I mean, we're like a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch square that just jammed right up in that soft part of your foot.
You thought about never having kids at that moment.
Or maybe getting rid of some of the ones I do have. Yeah, put them on Craigslist. But don't do that. Don't put kids on Craigslist. Facebook, this is way easier. Yeah. Point being, like, it doesn't take much when there's no margin. There's no cushion there. Had I been wearing shoes, that would have been no big deal. But so many people live life that way, where as long as there's no Legos in the basement, as long as there's no disruptions. But going back to your question, if you don't have it can take, it could be a medical thing. You know, one of the gals in the office, her son just had surgery this week, yesterday, on an ear. He broke his hip earlier this year. He's had a rough year.
Oh man, poor kid.
Yeah, we should get him a helmet, but maybe a padded room. But no, he's an athlete. He's doing things, right? Sure. You know, and he's getting banged up. Sorry, Mason. Kick you while you're down. But like, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Or, you know, vehicle having issues. I got a vehicle in the shop right now, and they're making up new things every day that need to be fixed. Last night I went down there. They still don't really know what's wrong. They're just like, hey, we'll just throw money at this and see if this problem goes away, kind of like the US government. But there's so many things like that where life just happens.
Sure.
And if you don't have that margin, what do? Well, a lot of times that margin is already erased by debt. You know, people not looking at what they can actually afford, but just looking at what can they make payments on next month. You start stacking a few of those things up together, and then you have something like an appliance go out. Relatively minor. But then, okay, you can't pay for it this paycheck. So that goes on a credit card. 6 months down the road, something else happens. You know, maybe your hours get cut at work. A little bit more goes on. This snowball starts to build, and pretty soon it wipes you out. And we saw that a lot in again, the 80s is extreme.
Oh, sure.
But that can happen just in your day. You don't need a recession like we had. It can be something just in your life where if you don't have that buffer between you and life, and this is why we're so big on emergency funds, not just eliminating debt, but building up an emergency fund. Small things can wipe you out. And Scott was just a testament to living within his means, not overextending himself. I know the guy said no to a lot of opportunities and a lot of things where maybe he could have made more money, but it also might have wiped him out if things went wrong. And I think a lot of people, when life is going smoothly, the paychecks are coming in consistently, to start getting a little bit lax, a little bit complacent what they're spending their money on. And then that margin starts to shrink and can eventually disappear.
What do you tell the guy that's just absolutely yelling at his speaker right now that says, yeah, but Chad, I want to start a business, and how do I possibly do that without debt?
Start slow, start small. And I think when you're paying for things in cash, you make better business decisions too.
Sure.
Like you don't spend money as frivolously. There's more accountability. When you're putting stuff on a card, it seems like somebody else's problem. Somebody else is paying for it. Now it's you next month that has to pay for it. But in the moment, it's easier to make more knee-jerk reactions and not be quite as intentional about what you're spending money on. I'll tell you that everything was extremely thought out, maybe even to a detriment early on. There's so little capital there that I had to be extremely careful about, what do I absolutely need this money to be doing? Making sure there was nothing frivolous, and also that I knew my numbers. I think a lot of business owners don't know their numbers, and money is getting sucked up into things that it shouldn't be. And it goes back to even just everyday folks that don't own a business, just with a budget. A lot of people don't know their numbers. They don't really know what they're spending money on. And we talked about before, money is like kids. If you don't tell them where to go and what to do, they're probably going to do something that you don't approve of.
Right.
And people that don't have a budget, whether it's in a business or their own personal life, a lot of times they aren't aware of what their money is doing. They're not intentional. And you get people that make a decent money to start having problems they shouldn't because a lack of proactive planning, a lack of intentionality when it comes to their spending.
It sounds like Scott was pretty intentional at the beginning. He said he started with just a few people, or maybe himself at the beginning, and then it went to 7 painters and then 70 painters.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, like from like half a dozen or so, like 70.
Yeah.
Yeah, and growing with focus and design, though, not just growing for growth's sake.
So one other thing that I wanted to touch on for a second that Scott had talked about, he talked about, his faith and that being a big part of it. But I also wanted to get your opinion. What about just having that faith type mindset? And what I mean by that is, I know that sometimes people come in and I have meetings with people and it's a lot of doom and gloom. And I think that that mindset of having faith in the future and having faith in the markets and those sorts of things is very important. What do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's essential, because if you don't think things are going to get better, then what's the point of saving for the future anyway?
Right.
Like, think about somebody who is, trying to get in shape. They're getting up early and they're hitting the treadmill. It's not fun. It stinks. We were just talking about running right before we started recording.
Yep.
And I mean, there's a reason why long distance runners look miserable in every photo.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. It's a miserable activity. But if you were trying to get in shape and you didn't think you could ever get your blood pressure down, you don't think you could ever lose weight, you don't think you're ever going to reduce your A1C, your insulin resistance, then what's the point? Why go through the pain? If you don't think you can ever have financial independence, if you don't think you can ever pay off your debt, if you don't think you can ever get to a place where you never need your paycheck, what's the point? Why sacrifice today for a future that isn't going to be there? If you think that the world is going to implode and North Korea is going to invade and nuke us all, why save for the future? Exactly. So you have to have a vision of the future. And I believe faith, not just in the future, but faith in something bigger than yourself. I mean, Scott and I and you, we believe in a creator God, and having faith in something beyond you, though. And especially with Scott, like that really drove a lot of his decisions, because wealth was not an end in itself. Right. It was a tool that he used to put him in a position to better the lives of those around him. And you said it. It started with his employees, giving them potential, pouring into them. One of the things I heard one time at a business conference, somebody was they were talking about training their employees, like how much you invest. And I think it was Pat Lencioni. They were asking Pat, like, well, what do you train all these employees? You pour all this money into them, you do all this investment into them, and they leave. And he's like, well, what if you don't put anything into them and they stay?
Right.
You want to grow your employees, right. Not grow in just the number, but grow them in their ability. And that's what Scott did. So it started with his employees. Then it started with the community. Now it's all over the state. And he's investing in things that you and I know will have an eternal effect. Oh, and Scott believes that too. And it's the old Gladiator quote. What you do here on this field will ripple into eternity. And you don't have to believe what we believe in order for that to ring true in your own finances. But point being, finances were means to an end. His business, the opportunities they were a means to an end. It wasn't to sit on a huge pile of money. It was to bless others and create not just a better life for himself and his family, but for the families of those around him. And again, now it's spread all over Alaska.
I think one of my favorite quotes that Scott shared with us that really resonated with me and caused me some pause to think about was when he was talking about generosity. Scott said, even if the wealth doesn't come, the rewards are still there.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because sometimes we have folks that we've worked with that have been very generous, and maybe those rewards didn't show up as as wealth. And for a lot of people that Scott's helping, his wealth is already there. So people could say like, well, no, it's easy for you to say you got it. But it was clear in our conversation, the generosity started before the wealth.
Right.
And a lot of what he's doing is these are people that can't repay him.
Right.
These are people that he's not going to get any type of monetary benefit. And that's the point though, is you get to a point where you can help people that can never pay you back, and you don't need a kickback. It isn't,
sure,
Greg, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Scott's just out there scratching other people's backs, which
right.
sounds creepy, but metaphorically.
Right. Well, his reward is, seeing kids play basketball now, in his community.
And families coming together around
incredible.
that. And yeah, it's, again, wealth was a means to an end. And I think even Dave Ramsey, we work with a lot of Dave Ramsey folks and a lot of his fans, and we work closely with that organization. There's a lot of criticism, I think, especially within churches, that Dave Ramsey's always talking about money. And that is, he does talk a lot about money. Yeah, it's what he does. And, it's all about being wealthy and all that. And it's not. It's about stewardship.
Right.
And I look at somebody like Scott, and he is a steward. And a steward, by definition, is somebody who manages something on behalf of somebody else. And Scott very clearly looks at his blessings as something given to him by God that he manages. But yes, he benefits from it, but ultimately it's to make an impact in the lives of those around him. And I believe Dave Ramsey's heart is in the same place. And for the folks that we help, they're using wealth as a means to an end, is to build more freedom and abundance in their life, not so they can die on a pile of money,
right?
But so they can do more of what they love with who they love and make an impact in the lives of those around them.
Absolutely. That funneled down through generations. Yeah. Anyways, I really appreciated Scott. I thought that the story that he shared with us was just incredible, and really appreciate him being on the podcast.
Yeah. We'll have to have him back. He's salt of the earth. And what he built was phenomenal, but those principles, the patience, the discipline, the keeping his liabilities low so he could absorb more risk. Like, those are things that anybody at any stage of your life can start implementing now. And the generosity, you don't wait until you have wealth to be generous. You start the habit now. It's already ingrained. It's a part of your process. And then as your wealth builds, your generosity grows too.
It's awesome. Well, thanks, Chad. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us two quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.
The information expressed is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations for any individual. It is suggested that you consult your financial professional, attorney, or tax advisor with regard to your individual situation. Hypothetical investment results are for illustrative purposes only and should not be deemed a representation of future results.